Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luhr, and I'm excited about the topic today and welcoming another Asian entrepreneur on the line here, Mr. Andrew Collins. Andrew is calling in from Singapore. Welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Marcus, great to be here. Good to be here in Singapore with you now.
Exactly, hanging out in our neighborhood. But before we get into all the fun stories, let me just quickly introduce you a little more. So Andrew is the founder and the CEO of the Mailman Group. And anyone who's doing business in China would know that group. They're an award-winning global sports digital consultancy and agency with a headquarters in Shanghai. The group has also recently, or I think a few years ago, acquired a group in Europe called 7 League, which is one of the leading sports digital consultancies in Europe. It's also partnering with Cabo, which is, again, another social media technology company. And Andrew's done a whole bunch of exciting things there in China, built an incredible business, which is now going global. So our conversation really is going to be about, of course, a little bit of what Chinese social media and the company is doing and how it started. But clearly also the conversation is going to be about his entrepreneurship. What does it mean to be a foreigner from Australia, is where Andrew is originally from, or what the Chinese call us a Laowai in China, which actually means alien. What does it mean to be that type of person or type of an entrepreneur in China, and how can you succeed? So this is really the framing of the conversation. And as we always do, we kind of get a bit started, a bit of a warm-up kind of question or intro from how you got in there. And I read your bio, but I love your side of the story there, Andrew. Please fire away.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my pathway to the sports industry is very unorthodox. Actually growing up, I never really had an aspiration to get into the sports industry, although I was very active. Played a lot of tennis, Aussie rules football. I've got an identical twin brother, another older brother who's only 12 months older, and a younger sister. So we were super competitive. And I think that definitely plays out in our corporate strategy with my approach to what we do.
Right.
And, yeah, I never even thought about going to China, actually, until it was my final year of university in Swinburne in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. I was invited to go to Singapore and Shanghai as part of a global entrepreneurship summit. So I got the invitation to go, and around that same time, I just won this award at university called the Chancellor's Award, and they gave me the university gave me literally a $10,000 check finishing university. It was an entrepreneurship award. So it was a nice way to finish, and part of that was going to Singapore and Shanghai on this 10-day junket with roughly 50 other foreign entrepreneurs from all over the world, and we were all there about 22 to 25 years of age. Right. First big experience for me in Singapore and China. Anyway, post that trip, got back to Melbourne and was completely besotted with Shanghai. And, and China. I really got the China bug, and I began to just think about, what would a career look like in China? Right. And finishing studies, at the same time I was running a small import and retail business. I was actually importing perfume from all over the world and selling it through retailers in Australia, which I set up during university. And I just started reading up on China. I actually read a bunch of books. One I read, which was really powerful, was called Thick Face Black Heart by a woman named Ching-Ning Chu. Uh-huh. And then I also read the follow-up one, which was called The Asian Mind Game, if you're familiar with that, Marcus, being in Asia. Just started to learn about China. Then around that time, finishing university, I then took a part-time job at a global communications firm called Jack Morton worldwide. Mm-hmm. And in pretty awesome company to work at. They were a US firm built off the idea of at the intersection of events and business. So a lot of corporate events, experiential events. So this company did like the Super Bowl halftime entertainment, the Olympic Games opening closing ceremony. Right. So big, massive, large-scale events. Right. The Australian business had 3 or 4 offices. I was doing business development, and I was doing it 3 days a week out when I finished university. while also just doing my thing. And for me, it was really important to have the freedom. So I never wanted a full-time job. That was a difficult conversation to have with the folks at Jack Morton who wanted me to there full time. But
right.
I said I'd be happy to work part time if you want me. I'll do it. And then we did it. Had a great time. I learned a ton being there about branding, consistency, discipline with marketing, how to do storytelling, building culture. All these things were just like really, really valuable for me. And I think at the time I didn't really understand why it was so valuable, but then having, then eventually setting up a company and running a company, I often reflected back on my experience at Jack Morton.
Good.
Yeah, so it was around
you landed in China around 2007, right? If I recall
yeah, so it was around 2005 where I sold that small retail business, quit the job at Jack Morton, and then I did a backpacking trip by myself around the world for about 9 months. So I went to US, Canada, a few parts of Europe, and then Asia, and got back to Melbourne. It was about the start of 2006, and I, over the course of that journey, I decided I was going to go back to China and start a company.
Right.
And my logic was Australia's a small market. China really will be the most powerful country in the world in the future.
Yep.
The next decade will be critical. And I wanted to invest just as much time as I would in Australia into a bigger economy. And there was no desire to get into the sports industry at that point. I was so eager to get into Shanghai. I just, in fact, at the time, I wanted to start a publishing company, like a magazine, because I had always had big aspirations to get into the media industry, and I watched Rupert Murdoch and Kerry Packer, two Australian icons of that industry back in Australia. And I called a guy who I knew used to run a magazine, and I actually knew him through a friend. Called my friend. I said, have you got this guy's phone number? His name's Dan Jade. And got his phone number, called him up. I said, look, do you want to grab a beer on Sunday afternoon? I want to talk to you about your experience running a magazine. We met up for a drink. It was about 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in Port Melbourne. By roughly 6 p.m. that day, we both agreed to start a magazine in China.
All right.
And at the time, he was running another business at the time. He was similar age to me. We're both fairly young. We're like 25, 26 years of age.
Yeah.
And, just sort of young and dumb, really. And then over the next 18 months, did 5 or 6 trips to Shanghai, and we just started meeting people. And the goal was to start a company in publishing or buy a company in publishing. When I say buy, I mean with not a lot of money, or do a joint venture with a firm that we could sort of run. And then, it was sort of like I think it was the 3rd or 4th trip, we met this guy. It was actually quite funny, really. We were sitting in this office in Shanghai, which is more of a bit of a financial and economic hub in Shanghai, but not the main one, sort of the secondary one. And Daniel said, I'm going to go and see this guy named Kirk who runs this company called Mailman. And it was 40 degrees outside, so humid. We were wearing suits. And I said to him, oh, you go. I can't be fucked going. You go. And then as Daniel's walking out the door, I say, oh, wait, I may as well come. So this is like lunchtime. So we get in a taxi and head over to this random office called Mailman in this really small street called Tai Kung Lu in the center of town. A really sort of old, hip neighborhood, which has been converted into a bit of a tourist area now. And, we met this guy who ran this business called Mailman. And at the time, it was a company that did postcard media sales. Right, So, we walked in there and then had a great conversation with Kirk. We went, I think we grabbed coffee or lunch at this restaurant that he also owned. And then we just started talking about what we wanted to do in China, and he was sharing his experience. I remember him just laughing at what we wanted to do and just thinking, he just thought we were so stupid. Later that night, we actually got that feedback a lot, by the way, from a lot of people. But later that night, we all went out for a drink, and then Kirk and I, particularly, we hit it off. And at the end of that trip, Daniel and I are back in Melbourne, just sort of recapping the trip and then weighing up, what are our options. We're weighing up doing a joint venture with a Chinese advertising agency. We were going to put roughly $200,000 into the business and then run the publishing division. And then I think I proposed, I think it was in Melbourne, I said, Dan, why don't we look at buying Mailman? Kirk seemed like he wanted to get out of there. He had 3 kids. He'd been there 7 years. So we started talking to Kirk about what a deal might look like and if he was open to it. Turned out he was. So it's roughly 3 to 4 months of reviewing what the business actually did, and then we soon learned that the business was losing money. Every month it was losing money. The product itself had this postcard media channel was like really fast going out the door. The rise of digital just destroyed the business.
Right.
LED screens everywhere, taxi media screens everywhere, elevator screens everywhere. All this was cannibalizing this very old traditional form of media.
Yeah.
And then I was so headstrong about just going into the market, and part of that was because I'd already told everyone I was going to leave, and I didn't want to be having that conversation. It's like, what are you still doing here? I thought you were moving to China.
Right.
So on the next trip, we were doing our final wrap up of the due diligence, and then Daniel, we finished that trip, finished our due diligence report, and we're sitting in Melbourne, just sort of weighing up the decision. Daniel says to me, it's a terrible business. It's a terrible idea. It's never going to work. We shouldn't do it. And by the way, I'm not going to go to China anymore. It's too hard.
Right.
And I was in total shock because up until that point, he'd actually been with me ever since day one.
Right.
He'd done every trip with me. So I never really considered going myself. Following that was quite of a shock to the system. But, I was 27. It was about January of 2007.
Yeah.
I called Kirk and said, Daniel's out and I'm in. I'm going to do it myself. So
all right.
I then bought the business effectively over the course of 6 months thereabout and moved in May of 2007. Was my first day in China as a tenant. I had an apartment already that I got on the last trip. I was so eager to go. I rented an apartment before I even lived there.
I love it.
That's how keen I was to get there. And then before you know it, I was sitting in Shanghai. It was May 10, 2007, and we had 4 staff, and we were Mailman, and we were selling postcard media, and that's how it all started.
I love this. It's an amazing story there, and I have plenty of flashbacks when we started the company in China. Actually, TSA was set up in 2004, so a couple of years before. Right. And when we were registered, and our Woofy is out of Shanghai as well. And the same thing, when I went there, I just fell in love with the city. And I was a bit like you. It's like, I got to move here. But my offices in Asia or in other parts were already a bit larger. So I couldn't really see myself moving to China, even though all the excitement which you saw there, I saw as well, right? How big this is going to be and the vibrancy of the place. And of course, Shanghai is an amazing city anyway. So in hindsight, I'm sort of almost like, damn, maybe I should have stayed a few years there. But I love that story. So,
well, I think that's the key thing. Like most people, they think they want to go to Shanghai and they want to do a couple of years there, but very few people are willing to do 10 years. And I think like if you want to have success in China, you have to think, am I willing to do 10 years in China?
Absolutely.
And so what companies end up doing is like no one is really willing to do that. Plus, it's just the sort of the macro environment and the local laws make it, just even more challenging.
But it's not an easy place.
Yeah, so people end up just going, well, I have to buy the company, really, or do a joint venture, which ultimately usually gets screwed anyway. So it's just such and I didn't envision doing 10 years either. I did 13 there full-time, but I didn't envision doing more than 4 too when I first got there, and probably by end of year 4 realised that actually I can't really put an end date on success. I could leave now with nothing, but I came here on a mission and I'm going to build value in the country. And so
tell us a bit about the early days, maybe just a short story on that before we get into the exciting world of all the stuff you guys are doing now. But, as you said, it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't like, hey, you just turned the company around overnight. It was a long slog, right?
Really long journey. So let's just think. So 2007 arrived. It probably wasn't until the end of 2009 where we as a team, when I say team, we had I think at that point we probably had 8 staff. Over that first 2 years, we had tried so many different media products just to stay alive, because everything that I had financially was in the company. So it's not like we had a lot of working capital to invest into new things.
Yep.
So it was really just like stay alive for the first 2 years, get as much business as possible. My time was mostly spent selling the media product to the agencies, the domestic, the local Chinese media agencies, the media buying agencies, and then some direct brands across Shanghai, Beijing. Right. And at the time, we had like 5,000 restaurants that we were distributing postcard media to. Right. But that was dropping by the month. And by the end of 2009, digital was roughly, I think the amount of people online in China in end of 2009 was close to 300 million. And that was an enormous audience. Like you figure that, like, compared to Australia, where I'm from, where I think at the time Australia probably had 12 million people online at that point. So you're talking about market size 30 times greater than where I was from. So for me, it was like, wow, digital is going to become part of society in a massive way here. They leapfrogged dial-up. They didn't even do dial-up internet. They leapfrogged broadband, just went straight to 3G internet. So we began, I hired people and started reading as much as I could and learning as much as I could around digital technology, social media, which was just emerging then. I know WeWalt launched in 2009 as well. There was Renren that was out back then, which went under. Right. But, just learning as much as we can. And then I think our first client ever was American Airlines. All right. And, a fantastic guy, Wesley Stockstill, was the VP at the time, and he said to me, if you do digital, I'll support you as a client. And I was like, I'm going in. And we signed, I think it was $1 million RMB contract, biggest contract we'd signed up until that point. Right. And that was at that point where I thought, we're probably beginning to head in the right direction.
I like it.
And so that was that was end of 2009, beginning in 2010. And then it probably was our first sports client was the Australian Football League, when they did their practice game. They did their first ever professional game, exhibition game in Shanghai with Brisbane and Melbourne coming up. Right. And I went to the press conference to see it all happening. This is in the launch. And then I met the guys who were driving it from the AFL. And the guy driving at the time was named Dave Matthews. He's now the CEO of GWS, the team in Sydney in the AFL. And we hit it off. About 2 weeks later, we signed a contract. We were going to do the marketing for the event. And we launched an AFL Chinese website, did a bunch of social media, a lot of content marketing, feeding that content out to, hundreds of communities online and pulling traffic back to this website, talking about the AFL and explaining what it is and where they can watch it.
Okay, cool.
And then that was really our first entry into sports, and our first major international sports client was Liverpool Football Club, which was, I think that was in 2011.
Yeah, so you were dealing with Ian there, or who was it? Sort of
Ian
your contact?
was around. Yeah, Ian was around, but we were dealing with Paul Rogers back then. Right. Paul Rogers now at AS Roma, but he was at Liverpool.
Excellent. So, and like you said, you were a sportsman, right? So I guess you had the some sort of a bug in there, which linked to sport, but it wasn't your focus at the beginning, right? I guess you were focusing on traditional advertising routes and stuff. So, once you had, I guess, maybe once you tasted the LFL, did you then sort of specifically went after sports, and you realized maybe there is an opportunity because as a foreigner in the country, and this is what I've done for 25 years out here, right? I mean, people like talking to us because we sound the same, we look the same, right? And we can help translate it into the local environment, right? So was that a bit of your experience as well?
It was part serendipity, part deliberate. We didn't consider sports as a main category until probably 2013.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is still 7 years ago. And no, we were still serving more sports client by 2013, but the investment from the global sports community was so small into the market, you couldn't survive. Okay. So although we actually built a sports department pretty early and started focusing on digital and sport very early, probably, in 2011, 2012. However, we couldn't really make it a clear value proposition and a focus until 2013 and onwards.
Okay.
And that was when the country really started to make a commitment on sports, and global rights holders, began putting China at the top of their, corporate strategy on where to grow audience and dollars.
Right.
Yeah.
At the beginning, what were you doing for these guys? I mean, I remember, of course, it was everything from local websites and other stuff. But tell me a bit more. What is it really? What you were doing there? And then we'll go into what you're doing now. Of course, which is much broader.
I'll give you an example. Yeah, I'll just give you examples of different projects. I mean, this is way back. So the AFL, we were like building local Chinese website, running social media marketing to promote the exhibition game. For Liverpool, they came out on tour to Guangzhou, and we did all the marketing promotion online for it.
Right.
When Manchester United came out, we did the same thing. I think that was 2012. And the business really evolved, but it went from being very social heavy to now, right now, I mean, we own e-commerce rights. We have our own production studio, state-of-the-art studio. We produce like hundreds of hours of short-form direct-to-consumer content every month that gets distributed across the dozens of Chinese video platforms. We do a lot of digital strategy and entry strategy, media partnerships with all the platforms. It's much more holistic now. So social is still, I would say, the bedrock of the conversation, but it ends up being really just a tool to deliver the strategy, whatever that strategy may be.
Yeah. And how big is sports now compared to the other businesses? Is all swung completely towards the sports side, or you still have a
you mean for us? Oh no,
for you now.
We're 100% sports.
Okay. So the other things you're used to do before, you're just completely.
Yeah, no, we occasionally we did some travel clients within that space and really tried to integrate sporting opportunity as well. But as a business, we've been pretty much sports focused from 2013 to 2014. And we were certainly the first agency in China doing sports digital marketing. And I remember having conversations with clients, and they're like, "Oh, look, our budget's $500, and then still saying, "Okay, we can look at it,"
Right.
So
you got to start somewhere, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Now, give me a couple more examples of, take one of your bigger clients, and give us the whole sort of breadth of what you're doing for them. I'm not going to ask you how much they pay you, but, just give us a good sense of really how deep you guys are dealing with the big football teams or the NBAs, et cetera.
So, our business, we work, I'll just give you a backdrop to the group now. So, we have Mailman in Shanghai. So we're a one group, two brand company. So the group is Mailman Group.
Right.
The two brands are Mailman and 7 League. Mailman is in Shanghai with roughly 110 people. In Shanghai, they're about 45 in Southeast Asia with a regional HQ in Singapore.
Right.
And then in London, we have 7 League with roughly 40 people full-time in London, and then people all throughout Europe. Right. Core business, sports digital agency and consulting services. So we tell you...
What does that mean?
Yeah, we tell you what to do,
right.
And then the other half of the business goes and does it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, here's a strategy, here's a strategic framework if you want to build success in China or Europe or Asia, and here's an executional model and team that can go and deliver that for you.
Got it.
So I'll just give you some raw examples.
Yeah,
in
please.
Europe, we do the Chinese social media. Sorry, not Chinese social media. We do the talk China too much. We do the European social media across France, Germany, Italy, some other markets in Europe. But NBA, same thing for the Scandinavian markets for, say, NHL.
Right.
Whereas in China, we will do. Let's just look at Panini, for example. Panini is the collector card football sticker card, huge organization. They have contracts with NFL, NBA, and everyone,
right.
And FIFA included. We not only run the Chinese social media, we run the e-commerce strategy. We do e-commerce management.
Right.
We manage the live streaming weekly events with card collectors. We produce short-form content. We manage the athletes that they engage with when they're in China to promote the products. We track and analyze all that, and then grow the business. So the KPI for them is really around sales. Whereas, let's say the NFL, where in China we run the social media for the entire 32 teams in the NFL roster.
Yeah.
That includes all the content, localization of existing content across their global channels like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but also the creation of local content. Right. A good example of that is with the Patriots, we produced a Tom Brady 6-part short form for internet-only web show.
All right.
And then even to big-scale projects like FIFA for the Russia World Cup, but also the France Women's World Cup last year.
Mm-hmm.
For the Russia World Cup, we had a team of 16 on the ground across, mostly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, shooting content, producing content, running all the social media,
right.
But then also managing the commercial activation for the 6 Chinese commercial partners in China, and then putting dollar values to that. So not only like creating the digital inventory for sale, but then executing on that, then measuring the impact and ensuring that it meets the contractual whatever obligation that the rights holder would have.
Yeah.
And then we do even athlete branding, PR, management.
Right. So what are the couple of the names you guys work with right now? I remember seeing before you worked with Ronaldo and Kobe Bryant, but who are your sort of current client maybe?
Yeah. A bunch. Some of them I don't like to talk too much about, but we work with David Beckham, Ronaldo now,
right.
Harry Kane, and there's dozens of other footballers and NBA
right.
athletes that we work with, even like UFC stars like Zhang Wei Li, current world champion. So yeah, the business is quite broad across federations, leagues, teams, athletes, and then a growing category for us is a lot of the sponsor activation. So sponsors that are
right.
looking to leverage off the rights holders,
the association,
reach into consumers in Asia, and how to activate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think you're sitting in a very, very sweet spot there. And maybe before we go further, how has the current climate, how has that impacted your business? Being so digital driven, you would think this maybe is in your favor, but what is happening here in the environment right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, nothing's in our favor when the world is suffering.
Correct.
Our clients have suffered a lot, but as a business, yeah, we've remained stable.
Right.
This year we just took an approach where let's just support everyone that we engage with, and just build goodwill and make sure that our job is really to make their lives easier, not more painful. If they have trouble, paying bills or meeting their own expectations, we just work with them on that. But as a company, we're quite solid, stable. We right. expect a good year still.
Right. No, because you're still relying at the end of the day on the advertising dollar in some fashion, right? Certain things you do, I guess.
There's always a trickle down effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Top down. So I don't think anyone's immune, but as a business, I think most organisations haven't sat at the boardroom and said we're going to pull our digital strategy. Yeah,
that's for sure. I think you're sitting in a good space there. That's for sure. Now, I want to talk a bit about the China landscape in not just social media, but in the larger context of because it is so different, right? And clearly, if someone who is only used to YouTube and Facebook and whatever Twitch and Instagram, they won't have a clue about the groups you're dealing with there in China. So let's dig just a bit around there. I mean, of course, as you said, you're dealing across all those. What is the hot one right now? I mean, I know TikTok is the hot one around the world, and there is, of course, it's born out of the Chinese version there. But where do you guys spend sort of your time on right now, and where do you see is the new exciting space in China?
Well, I think everyone's having to realize that video has moved 30 to 40% of that audience attention to short form video. So largely driven by Douyin, which is the ByteDance TikTok, but Douyin is the Chinese version. Kuaishou is just coming up now, which is Tencent backed short form video similar to Douyin TikTok, but with a really strong live stream and e-commerce function to it.
Right.
So those two are showing, really good growth. You've still got like the streaming platforms like iQIYI, Tencent, PP Sports, Youku.
Yep.
It's a pretty dynamic industry.
In
and it
some
does
market,
come
in
to
some areas,
change.
I would say it is way more dynamic and even more developed than the Western markets. Would you agree with that? General
Yeah,
comment?
the platforms, like, you know how, like, if, for example, in the West you have platform like Netflix, where
Yep.
it only sells, video. That's their model. Well,
Right.
the market is still fairly immature for paid subscribers. So
Right.
all these platforms have, I mean, like the rights holder platforms like an iQIYI or a Tencent
Yep.
or PP Sports, for example, or Yoku, they have a much more dynamic and broad business because they're unable to really monetize purely sports-related content.
Right.
Yeah, so whereas Douyin and Kuaishou, they've got a really robust advertising model now, but they're just short form, free to use platforms.
Yeah. I mean, short form is, I think it's amazing, and China is, in my mind, is leading the way. Not just TikTok, but all the other platforms are doing it. But and the monetization there it's basically what, an advertising driven model around it most of the time or how do they monetize it really in the best possible way?
Yeah, short form. It's all advertising.
Right.
No pay to play.
So what are the pay platforms? I mean, we had our, the ones which always went under there, the TV, and then you had PPTV and others. Where do you see the long form content? Where is that heading in China, and where is the future there?
I think it still has. Well, it certainly still has merit. I mean, entertainment really drives that, though. So it's all the Chinese dramas, Korean dramas. They get a lot of the value in that. In the money that's going around for long form content. Like, even if you look at The Last Dance, although it was a success in China, nowhere near the online buzz that it delivered globally, and nor did they pay anywhere near.
And if you look at sports, where do you see the Premier Leagues and the NBAs of the world? How they continue to drive money or the monetization in China? Where if you were betting man, where would you bet on?
I don't think there's any worry for a NBA or a Premier League. I think the cream rises to the top. It's a real, so the platforms tend to they put an anchor in the ground around one product. So Tencent put it around NBA. PP Sports put it around the Premier League and football in general, but predominantly Premier League. And then the struggle is that all the second tier, but are still, so second tier in China, but still first tier in many markets of the world.
Yep.
They really struggle to get good money for their rights, but also just like good talent working on the rights, creating, shoulder content and other localized content formats around it.
Right.
That's the real challenge when you're not the number one player, because the demand for the Premier League or the NBA, it's so high that all the money goes into those.
It sucks everything else out of the market.
It sucks everything else out. So
correct.
Yeah, so it's very tough for.
You guys play a role in that in terms of helping then this, let's call it what we would call second tier, which the Bundesliga isn't second tier in Germany, but it is maybe second tier in this sense. You guys work with these kind of rights holders to help them market that and bring their value up. I'm assuming you do, right?
Yeah, we've not only. I mean, we obviously provide guidance and insights on how to navigate the environment and where to sort of place your bet, what sort of deals to accept, what not to.
Right.
And we have sold, dozens of, or a bunch of different rights, from like live streaming rights to interview rights to football club channel rights.
Okay, so you are in the sort of trading side of that business as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think as a company, you sort of have to be. We spend millions of dollars with the platforms.
Right.
So it does give you a degree of leverage and access that as a company we sort of, in a way, are compelled to. But yeah, it is still challenging for anything that is not a tier one property to get really strong value in the market. You've got to be quite creative. If you're selling a short form or even just long form multi-series program like a documentary, for example, the platform is really looking for more than just the content. They're looking for some sort of commercial rights, an event, athlete appearances, and they're going to look to maybe break up that rights in any way they like to be able to monetize it.
So basically what you're saying is to really, break into China and of course be commercially successful. It's one thing if you can stream it free and the whole world watches it. But if you are really trying to monetize it, you have to be a whole lot more creative.
Yes.
Now, that's, I think, the underlying message, right?
For sure. Absolutely.
It's getting harder and harder. Now,
Yep.
One thing is, and I've seen from certain reports, which you shared and others, that KOLs, right, the influencers, key opinion leaders, are a big thing in China, right? I think I read somewhere 50% of people, depend on their, for their purchasing or decision making, and somewhere over 85%, I think, trust them, believe that what they're telling me is the truth. How does that work in the world of sports? Do you leverage that as well, or is that more for traditional brands?
In some respects, even more powerful. Like the fan communities in China and even in Asia, they're very influential among their peers.
Right.
So it's typically one young guy, could be 25 years of age or 30 years of age, living in, say, Nanjing, and he's the head of a Premier League supporters club, Premier League team supporters club. And he has enormous influence among the fan communities here. I mean, this guy would be more than likely running fan viewing parties. He would be selling merchandise himself. Right. A lot of that merchandise would likely be fake.
Okay.
They would be selling jerseys that they'd be importing from Hong Kong and selling it. They'd be getting it from maybe even the real supplier and then selling it at the back of the truck, and even on Tmall and Taobao, which is the e-commerce giants.
Yeah.
So they actually have enormous influence, and as a company, we've taken an approach where engage them as much as possible, but ensure that they know that we're equally as important for them, because they also need the status. Yeah. They need the recognition from the club to maintain their own status within their community. Right. So, but you see rivalries with fan communities as well. Yeah. Like it might be two guys who are fan leaders of their respective fan communities, which may have 1 million followers in it.
Yeah, I love it.
That compete for the respect and the admiration of their peers to be the most important fan community for that team.
Yeah. One other thing, and that goes along the similar lines, which is this huge thing in China, of course, is the actual live streaming. And that means someone physically does something, right? Performs, sings. Whatever, pictures of product and so on, and then people can interact with them. That has kind of gone a bit around the world as well, but I don't think as at a level that it is in China. How much is that being used in your space as well, or in the world of sports, or is that really more pure entertainment?
No, absolutely. I mean, esports is one of the most profitable categories. I think it is the number one profitable category for Tencent.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think they make way more money on the gaming category than any other category in their business. In fact, it probably keeps everything else afloat. Yeah. Organizations or companies like Laowai Sport, they have a sports department as well. They look at various rights, but they just don't pay for sports like live rights. So they look for creative ways to stress the value, but they're largely driven by UGC and gaming titles. That's filling their content, similar to Twitch, really, whereas Twitch is beginning to look into the sports category in terms of becoming a rights holder. Yep.
Are you guys playing in the esports space as well, or are you more focused on the real world sports?
We have an ownership of a team, Nova Esports, out of Hong Kong. Okay. We're just one of the owners, but I've been involved with them for about 2 years. They're a successful team. They have successful teams all over the world, across multiple publishers. Okay. We do a lot of work with a lot of esports teams, including Evil Genius, EA. We consult with EA, and then there's some more work as well going on at some of the real big corporates building out esports strategies out of London.
When you look at both esports and traditional sports, and in China, as you rightly said, esports is huge already, right? It's just an absolute massive market. Where do you see this heading? Do you see this? Can they live with each other, or who is going to win this race?
I don't think. Well, number one, I don't think it's a race. It's a very different corporate structure, and the all the money's with the game publishers.
Yep.
So the money is not with the teams, largely speaking. Very few teams make money in esports. Very few individuals make a lot of money. I mean, you could probably count on one hand or maybe two hands the amount of esports athletes, let's call them athletes, who make more than $500,000 a year. So the industry is not for the athlete. The industry is for the casual game players at home that spend $80 on the game, or let's say $30 on the game and $300 on the console. The esports is just a curtain into the industry, yet the publishers make all their money on the casual game players with the in-game buying.
Correct.
So there's too much weight and power on the publishers and the rights holders that I think from a strategy point of view, a rights holder should absolutely be in the game because that's where they get the money. You'll get the money. But from a team ownership point of view, you need to be very, very clear about where you will get a return.
Yep. No, I agree. And it's a different conversation, but it's an interesting viewpoint there. Esports, if people always try to compare it right away with traditional sports and professional leagues, it is very different. Like I said, the power base is very different.
And also it's not like we're seeing major esports titles with prime time viewing on free-to-air networks. Or, so that's largely driven by internet culture, which is still massive, but the dollars are really around the casual game players. Right. So it's not, the guys sitting at home playing League of Legends, Pug 3 or whatever, and buying products or Fortnite buying products within the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one other thing I want to talk a bit about, and that's, of course, is China is all mobile, right? I mean, it's just a crazy mobile market. I think the number I saw is about 900 million people out of 1.4 have access to the internet, and pretty much every single one of those connections is through a mobile device. So it really is mobile. It's mobile only, not mobile first. How does that change in terms of strategy or the things you guys do compared to maybe a Western setup?
It does influence the way someone consumes the product, the rights holder. For example, most kids watch, number one, kids aren't watching, I say kids, but let's just say young adults.
Yep.
They're not watching football at the pub, largely speaking. Right. They're watching football on their computer or their cell phone in their bedroom. And if they're living at home with their parents, even more so, they're sitting in their bedroom, because they don't want to. There's only one TV in the household, and they're not sitting in the living room watching it. So it's a very, very different solo viewing experience, unlike Europe and even Australia, where I'm from. Okay. Like it's we go to the pub and watch the sport together. It's a social thing. Right. So it's a completely different experience. But these people are very active online on their cell phone throughout the game. Like they're not just watching the game. I think almost. I mean, it's safe to say next to zero. Consumers are just watching the football and not doing anything else.
So the social interaction is then on the social media platforms, right? That's how they connect with the rest of the fan community and while you're watching the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. Most of their lives are really through the cell phone,
right?
More than their, still life.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Now I want to switch direction a little bit here and talk about, as I said, where we kind of started off with, being a Laowai in China, building a business there. Talk a bit about your learnings, both from what worked and what didn't work. I think I'm sure you have some interesting stories on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's how long's a piece of string. I'm trying to think that maybe interesting. I think about defining moments. I think that's really important. Like think what happened in the market at a certain point in time, and how did that shape your, decision making or whatever it may be. It was probably the most significant thing for me personally was getting to year 4 or 5 and then realizing that we couldn't put an end date on. I couldn't put an end date on how long I wanted to be in China. Right. As a foreigner, you tend to go there and think, okay, because I'm a foreigner, I'll do X amount of years, then leave because it's not my home.
Yep.
That's actually just a really bad strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was a big shift in my mentality. So it did help too, because I met my now wife, but I met her within the first 6 months of living in Shanghai. So we were together ever since. So that definitely helped. We had 3 kids as well. So, but China will always be an anchor for us as a family. That helped as well. I think if you went in with that strategy, find local wife, have long-term view, you're definitely 50% of the way there. But that approach then at least allowed me to think very long-term. And the long-term view was about understanding, as a foreigner in this country, what unique set of skills and capabilities can we develop that add value to the economy? Right. And then being very clear about communicating that message to the West and then locally to all the stakeholders that we engage with.
Do you speak Chinese, actually?
My Chinese is just okay. It's not good, but I'm okay.
You get away with it.
Yeah, in my household, Chinese is the dominant language.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. And again, what you just said is exactly how, when I started TSA, which was a little before you started, I never looked at when I'm going to leave. That was never ever even on the radar. I never think I spent a minute thinking of that at all. It was always just about, where are we in here? How do we add value to that ecosystem? What can I bring as the knowledge I have? And or maybe the different approach we would bring to it than what the local market has. And when I started sports marketing in Asia, no one really knew what the heck it even was.
Yeah.
So and I'm sure similar in your space here. A lot of the things you guys were doing and are still doing now, it just developed right over that period of time, because the industries were exploding, but no one had really cracked it yet and figured it out. So
and I think China, you have to understand that you're actually in their country, and they make that very clear to you in very subtle ways, though. So in the way law is structured, in the way business is done, in a way the opportunities are delivered to you. And I think it's only let's say in the last 3 to 4 years where I've had a lot of Chinese business leaders, say to me, "Hey, I'm really impressed with what your company has done," meaning that we were not before, we now respect you. They immediately write off foreigners. They don't expect you to last. They don't expect that you'll stick around. Right. So, and you just take so many hits that you then become immune to the hits. You don't even see them. You don't even feel them. It's the default response and reaction that you get from local companies. They're just out to screw you most of the time, and then you have to go in there thinking, no, we have to sort of play by their rules and and find value together. And that's where you can create win-win partnerships with the domestic brands and the platforms. So I think there is a broader narrative around us versus them, but I believe deep down, they ultimately want the same thing you do, and that is success. And it just takes a long time to get the credibility and the trust, not being a native to their language and culture, to build.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, it's a sensitive subject, but this whole concept of reverse racism, right, which is sort of what they may, people maybe experience in other parts of the world. I think as a Westerner, you experience that in Asia as much as well, right? It's just part of it.
For sure.
So, and like you said, you just got to deal with it, and you've got to figure out how to blend in some way or the other, right?
Yeah, I think that concept of race, it's everywhere, really. That especially now with this sort of populist nationalist culture that's growing. I can't tell you how many times I experienced comments about me being with a Chinese wife in China, but more directed at her. What are you doing with the foreigner? Right. You should be with one of our own. Yeah. So that's. I don't think it's going backwards either at this stage.
Yeah. I know it's an interesting topic, and as I think most people always think that just happens the other way around, but it clearly happens here as well. Now, one thing I wanted to talk a bit more about is you've obviously done, besides building up your own company here, and now going global. Actually, talk a little bit about that before I move on to the other thought I just had. What is all the, how did you go from being clearly a small Chinese company to a big Chinese company now, something which you're doing globally? Yeah. What happened? I believe you had some investor coming in there, right, in 2012, and so you raised some decent money.
First time we raised money was in 2016.
Okay, 16.
Came in 2017, but we raised roughly 20 million US and then another 5 million US from 3 investors: Yao Capital, that's Yao Ming and his capital firm, We Capital, and Kaixin Capital. And those funds have been used to, expand a global vision. And our bet is that as we evolve, platforms are becoming much more flat, like available everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
Sports properties and rights holders becoming much more global. Their talent, their hiring are becoming more globally oriented. So that you might see a global head of marketing from Pepsi go to a Manchester United or something like that, or people from the entertainment industry doing it. We believe that rights holders will want to connect in a very local way in as many markets as possible. And so it's all about building more and more capabilities to deliver a global media company for a rights holder.
Right.
And so expanding into Europe helped that, expanding into Asia outside China helped that. And, we just continue to grow capabilities and reach and delivering better economies of scale to make it more affordable for rights holders to deliver that global communication plan and then build an effective commercial strategy underpinning it all.
Right.
And that's really driving the corporate strategy for us. It's really that.
Right. And that's your focus now, right? From what our earlier conversation, now being based out of Singapore, not in China anymore, I guess it gives you a chance to really look at the world in a different way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's also just a great change of scenery.
That's true.
Singapore itself is an economic hub for Southeast Asia. There's, over 600 million young people throughout Southeast Asia. Many of them love football and other sports. Many of them are growing sports like mixed martial arts, badminton, ping pong is growing. For me personally, I'm really charged with growing the group, building out that value proposition I talked about, and then helping everyone to integrate and connect with each other and collaborate, and then, just build a great culture in a place that people want to work at and clients want to work with.
So you're pretty much in essence now you operate across all of the global social media platforms and or any other platform which is out there across the board, right? Initially it was maybe China, but now it really is you've gone global in that sense, right?
Our biggest program we do now is the FIFA Global Fan Movement, which is over 50 markets.
All right.
We're in almost every language with a population greater than 5 million. And but with a dominant presence in China, with a growing presence in Southeast Asia.
Tell me a bit more about that program. What exactly is it? What are you guys doing for them?
It's a global fan-led local football community strategy to grow voices of football all over the world and tell football stories for FIFA.
Okay. And this is again short form content or
short form video.
Okay.
Written narrative.
Yeah. Very cool. And that is and so that's how long you've been engaged for? A while already, and
2.5 years on that program.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
Even if you look at NHL, which is largely a challenger brand out in this part of the world, we do their social and community building and digital strategy in China, doing the same thing with them in Scandinavia. Same client, big aspirations, growing brand, trying to find value and find relevance in new markets.
Interesting. What would be the if you sum it up as the biggest sort of lesson of all the things you've done? Whether it was something which worked and you're saying, look, I really learned out of that because it worked so well, or because it was a failure. Which would be if you pick one or two?
Good question. Off the top of my head, I would say discipline would be, and that is discipline to say no, and discipline to focus on areas that you believe you can be a leader in. So do less, but do more of it.
Right.
And then as we develop capabilities and strength and let's say leadership, then expand and do more.
Right.
That was probably the single most strict strategy or policy around our strategy to grow.
Yeah, interesting. Just to wrap it up, maybe here, because we've already covered a good ground on your life and your time in China, and now, of course, in Singapore, going global. Having investors there. Do you have an end goal? You didn't have an end goal necessarily going to China. What's your end goal? Taking the company public, or just keep running it and growing it, making it bigger? Is there some plan out there already?
Local strategy on Mars would be a good one. No, as a business, we just see we're still sort of learning, and still, I would say it's we've completed the first few miles of a marathon. We've got the infrastructure, the process. But there's still so much we can do. For me personally, I love what we do, love the industry, love the people we work with. We're just going to continue to grow, build out that value proposition. But we'd love to explore more in e-commerce, commercialization of video, become really the anchor for so many of our clients and their ability to grow their global brands. And that's where we're focused now. I'm not really looking. I sort of redo a strategy every 3 years, thereabout, and that seems to change every 6 months in Asia.
Yep.
So
it moves fast.
It's really tough to see where the market will go. But we've got a good team. We've got good leaders across most parts of where our businesses are, and also just seeing them flourish. I enjoy seeing some of our team. Some of our team have been with us for 9 years, 10 years.
Right.
And it's great to see them be leaders, travel the world, do what they love doing.
Yep. Well, it sounds like you're having fun there. You did a couple of investments too, right? Or you invested in others, or you founded a couple other things, the Loop Space and Transition China.
Founded a company called KWO in China, social media management technology.
Right.
Those guys are doing a great job. We invested in another company called Eco Sports, which is like the sports business journal of China.
Okay.
And we're also looking at a few others right now. But we'll continue to invest in talent, technology, and process. So anything that helps us deliver what we do better.
Like it. Talent, technology, and process. There we go. I love it. Very cool, Andrew. Look, I really enjoyed.
What's next for you, Marcus?
Yeah, what's next for me? My God, besides doing podcasts, huh? Yeah, well, I think podcast for me is an interesting one because it gives me a chance to, as I said, listen. I'm a talker in a general sense, right? Because I'm always on the sales side of the business, and having this podcast allows me or forces me in a sense to actually pay much more attention what others have done and then the learning of it. And so that is part of what I'm doing at the moment is besides sharing, of course, these amazing stories of people like yourself, it also really lets me to learn, think of new things. So there's a couple of projects I'm involved in right now. TSA clearly is pivoting in a very different direction of where we used to be. We've gone almost virtual now. I've pretty much shut all the offices down, and everyone is operating from home. To be a bit, ready for what I think is coming. I think we're going to see for the next, a year or two at least, some pretty nasty environments around the world. So I was quite happy at the moment that we were slim, lean, and mean, maybe if that's the right word. So that's where we're heading. I think it's probably a bit of a different journey. I love the digital space you're in. We went into it with SportFix, which was our OTT platform that fortunately we didn't quite have the stamina to pull it through, even though I still believe OTT is the future. But even we see with DAZN or others who have probably more firepower than we had, they're gonna. It's a long runway to get there. I think it's a constant learning, right? And this environment we're in now, it's so unique and different that exactly who knows how the next few years will look like in our industry. So. We're pivoting into consulting. We've a couple of really interesting consulting gigs going on there where we're building master plans for parts of Asia. a sports master plan. We're going into education. We're going into other areas which probably previously I would have never looked at because it just was a bit too on the edge of it. But I do see huge opportunities in that space to be a bit different again. And that's what I've done for 25 years anyway, right? I mean, if you look at what TSA was when we first started to maybe what we're now, we're a completely different company. And so I think you consistently, that would be my takeaway on it is that you have to consistently reinvent yourself. I call it TSA 5.0, which means there were 4 other incarnations of it already. I don't know how many incarnations you think you've gone through with your business, but that's how I would look at it. You just have to reinvent it, and sometimes you got to throw it all out in a sense, and start all over. And we've done that a few times.
Yeah. I mean, you've been in the game a long time.
Yes.
So kudos to you for hanging in there.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no plan to leave the place either here. I think they're going to bury me out here.
Yeah, sure.
Good, buddy. Hey, look, this was awesome. I really enjoyed the catching up with you. Hopefully we can do this in person next time when we're allowed to travel again, when you come out here or I'm in Singapore.
Cool, grab dinner here. Okay, definitely. Mate. Nice chatting.
You have a good one.
Well, see you, mate.
Cheers.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.